Hey, everybody, we're back again. Chapter 1, Lesson 2. This is Part 2, talking about principles of democracy. We're going to be looking at what principles are central to democracies, basically, what principles and ideas make democracy what it is. Okay, and these are principles and ideals. Okay, so they don't exist always in every democracy. They do to some point, but not in all of them to any extreme. So here we go. Okay, so number one point that is very important, I'm going to adjust my camera here a little bit. There we go. Okay, so number one point is citizen participation. It's a very, very basic part of democratic government. Without citizen participation, you don't have a democracy at all. It is a right that people have to participate in government, and there's a lot of ways you can participate in government, as you can see. But it's also a bit of a duty. If you don't have anyone serving on juries or in the military or paying their taxes or voting, then what happens to those things? Can we have a trial by jury if there's no jury? Can we have a military if nobody volunteers? Um, can the government do much of anything without the people paying taxes? The answer to all of that stuff is no. Can't have a democracy without any of those things. Okay, so voting, becoming informed, debating, not arguing, but debating issues. There's a difference between those two. Okay, um, debating issues is where you talk about the pros and cons of a specific point, and you actually are trying to understand the point of view of another person. Arguing is just where you argue your point, you know you're absolutely right, and you're not going to budge at all, and then you begin attacking the individual instead of the idea. That's arguing. Okay. Um, but like I said, being part of a volunteer organization is one way you can participate in government. So that would be like Lions or Kiwanis or one of those kinds of organizations, running for an elected office and actually protesting. Because without protesting, then we have no way of telling the government that we like or don't like what they're doing. Okay, so it is participation that makes democracy more powerful. The more people and citizens that participate in government through one of these ways, the stronger, the more powerful the democracy is. Okay? You also have to have free and fair elections in a democracy. Okay? That's the way that the people express their will, their desires, their beliefs for government, is by electing representatives in that government that believe the same things that they do. Okay? So elections have to be held on a regular basis, every certain number of years. Here in the US, it's every 2 years, with presidential elections happening every 4 years. Okay? Now, when you have those elections, who votes? Well, depends on the Constitution, but most democracies, every adult citizen has the right to vote and or run for office, regardless of their race, their gender, their religion, their ethnicity, their level of wealth, their position. It doesn't matter. They all have the right to vote and run for office. Now, also, to be part of a free and fair election, all votes have to be counted equally. No state's vote should count any more than anybody else's votes. No individual vote should count any more than anybody else's individual votes. Okay? And there should not be any obstacles placed in the way of voting. Okay? Intimidation, threats to people regarding their voting or their voting rights should not happen in a free system. Okay? So, what might be some obstacles that people place in the way of voting? Restricting mail-in voting, okay, which sometimes is called absentee voting. Okay, if you restrict that, then that limits how many people can vote and who can vote. Okay, eliminating polling places. If you downsize or reduce the number of places that people can go to vote, then that limits the number of people that can vote. That's an obstacle placed in someone's way of voting. Okay, not everybody owns a car. Not everybody can drive to a polling place. Polling places actually should be within walking distance. At least that's some points of view. Okay, requiring some form of a registration card, a voter registration card that you have to carry with you. That it can be an obstacle to voting because that means somebody has to get to a government office and get that document. Okay, it's not part of a free system, right? Accepting the results of elections. Okay, that's another big part. of the election process. Okay, is accepting the results of elections. There's always going to be winners and losers in every election. And, everybody believes strongly that their candidate or their group should win. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. But if that person or group refuses to accept the election results, then it's not a free and fair election. Now, those election results do have to be verified, okay? And there's a process for that, and we'll get to that later when we talk about the Constitution. But basically, democracy depends on a smooth, peaceful transition of power after an election. One person leaves, next person comes in, there's no arguments, there's no conflict. Last time that there was big conflict about an election actually was in 2000, where it took the Supreme Court to help decide the election. And that is what happened. There were some problems with the votes from Florida, and it took the Supreme Court ruling accepting those votes or not accepting those votes, and it pushed President George W. Bush into the presidency. Okay? And it was through that Supreme Court decision. I'm not saying that the election was stolen. There was a peaceful transition of power. However, George W. Bush became president, and it was a little bit disputed. Okay, rule of law. In democracies, everyone is subject to the rule of law. No one is above the law. It doesn't matter if they're the president, if they're any other elected official, if they're a political or military officer, if they're rich, if they're poor, if they're white, if they're black, if they're Asian, if they're brown. It doesn't matter. None of those things matter. Okay, the law is the law, and everyone is subject to the law. But then that also means that they're subject to the consequences of breaking those laws. Okay? Laws need to be enforced equally, fairly, and consistently for a democracy to continue to exist. Once that stops, once rule of law is applied only to some and not to others, like the wealthy can get away with things that the poor can't, then democracy begins to break down. We again begin to move towards not anarchy necessarily, but authoritarianism. We start moving towards authoritarianism as democracy begins to break down. Okay. Talking about elections, okay, democracies are based on whatever the majority of citizens who participate say. Okay, that is majority rule. When we have an election, whoever gets the most votes wins. That's majority rule, right? Okay, but there's also a balance that has to be done between what is tyranny of the majority, so that's when the majority passes laws that restrict the rights of a segment of the population, versus majority rule. Okay, so tyranny of the majority again happens when you have a majority passing laws that restrict the rights of a segment of the population. Okay? We have had that happen. Okay, there are a lot of people that are still upset over it. Same-sex marriage is an issue where there was tyranny of the majority. Still, a lot of LGBTQ rights are a subject of tyranny of the majority. The majority voted certain ways, and it restricted the rights of that segment of the population. So regardless what you may think of the gay or LGBTQ lifestyle, by voting against giving them the same rights that every other individual has in the country, that is tyranny of the majority. And that breaks down the democratic system and makes democracy move more towards, again, authoritarianism. And you're going to get tired of me hearing me say that. I'm going to say it a lot because that is actually the fact of the matter. As democracy breaks down, it moves towards authoritarianism. Okay? Again, Hitler, Nazi Germany, 1930s and 40s. It was a democracy. It broke down because it started taking away rights from people. It became totalitarian. Big example. Okay, accountability. This goes right along with rule of law. Okay, elected and appointed officials are responsible for their actions and have to be made accountable to the people. A lot of times that just happens through voting. You hear that an elected individual did something they shouldn't have, you don't re-elect them. There he is, problem solved. That person's gone and out. So a lot of times officials make decisions that don't go along with the will of the people. and then they get reelected over and over again, and then people wonder why we have a corrupt system. Okay? So officials make decisions based on the will of the people that they represent, not just themselves and not just their friends. Okay? They have to vote on what the will of the people that they represent is. So if the people tell them to vote one way and they feel like they should vote another way, what's their accountability? Why are they even there? Who are they representing? They're representing themselves. They're not representing the people that elected them. Okay? Transparency goes right along with accountability. You can't be an accountable government if you're not a transparent government. Okay? So a transparent government is a government that allows the people to see and know what is going on. Okay? So they have open public meetings, they publish documents explaining what's going on to make it possible for citizens to learn and find out. That includes access by the press. Wherever the elected officials are, the press needs to be allowed to be there and see what's going on. If elected officials begin to push the press out or tell them, oh, well, you members of the press can be here, but you other members can't be, they start picking and choosing who their favorites are. Again, that's a breakdown in democracy and a movement towards, that's right, authoritarianism. Because now it's not freedom of the press anymore. It's government-controlled media, government-controlled press. Okay? That's also why we have a constitution, is to limit our government and what the government can and cannot do. We also have a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is a list of rights that are supposed to be guaranteed and guaranteed protected by the government. Okay? And usually a Bill of Rights doesn't mean that those are the only rights that people have, but it means that those are the ones that are most important to the democracy, and those are the ones that the government is going to guarantee to protect. Okay? And when the government stops protecting those rights, guess what that means? That's right. You move out of democracy and more towards authoritarianism. Okay? Control of abuse of power. Again, constitutions are written to divide up the power of government, create divisions within the government. And I don't mean divisions like bad things. I mean like literally divide the power up between different branches of government so that not one branch can become more powerful than another. Okay? That's how we keep power from being collected all into one space. We split it up physically. Split it up. Okay? As well as written in the Constitution. Now, there's this thing called corruption, and corruption is when a government official uses their position, their power, their authority, and or government money to do something illegal, or they use those things in an illegal way. Okay. Again, checks and balances. That's where one branch of government has to work with another branch of government to get things done, or they have ways of overriding each other. Those were built into most democracies to try to prohibit or limit corruption, but corruption still happens. In most democracies, there is corruption. The difference is how much do the people hold those elected officials that are corrupt accountable? Do they just keep reelecting them? That's telling them it's okay. If they stop reelecting them and they elect other people, even if they don't really know who that other person is, if you keep a corrupted person in government, it just makes government more corrupted. Okay? In a democracy, the citizens have the opportunity of economic freedom. That means they have the opportunity to choose to own property, own a business, work at whatever job they want, earn however much money that they want to, all depending on the amount of work and type of work that they're willing to do. Okay? Now, the other part of economic freedom is the level of involvement the government has in the economy, and that is always debatable. Some democracies allow the government to have more control over the economy. Some democracies allow little to no. The U.S. is actually the most economically free country in the world today. We have less government restrictions on what people and businesses can do. Okay? Equality kind of goes back to rule of law a little bit and accountability. In a democracy, people should expect to be treated equally and equally valued as individuals and protected from unreasonable discrimination. Okay? Individuals maintain their rights to different cultures, religions, personalities, languages, and beliefs when living in a democracy. When individuals or groups are held accountable in different ways, that's not equality. When laws are passed that give advantages to some and not to others, that's not equality. Okay? And we're also talking about being equal in the eyes of the law. Okay? So if you break a law, you have to face the consequences of breaking that law. No matter who you are, what your position is, what your color, your gender, or anything else is, equal protection of the law and equal protection by law enforcement are part of a democracy. Okay? And individuals and groups have the right to protest and advocate for equal rights. That's holding the government accountable. When the government is not providing that equality, people have the right to protest and advocate for that equality. That's part of democracy. And again, if governments repress the voice of the people and take away rights or begin treating people differently based on who they are, that's not democracy. That's what? That's right, authoritarianism. Okay? Human rights, another part of that equality. Everyone has the right to certain things. They have certain rights just because they are human. So human rights. You're human, you have access to these rights. Things like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to move around and live wherever you want. Okay? Those are all freedoms. Those are all basic human rights. To the protection of an individual's dignity and respect, those are human rights, as well as individual rights. Um, your right to freedom of the press and your right to bear arms are part of individual freedoms, not always, though, human rights. Okay? Independent judiciaries, that's the court system. Okay? The court system should always be independent. That means impartial. Impartial and independent. That means that they should not be taking sides on any political issues. Okay? Shouldn't be taking political sides, shouldn't be taking sides on issues. They should make their decisions based on the law as it is. Okay? So, the judiciary needs to feel free to act without influence from other branches of the government and without political pressure. The only problem is judges, part of the court system, right? They're chosen by elected political leaders who have sides. So, how do we make sure that the choosing of our judges is actually fair and impartial, and that what we're getting is actually a fair and impartial judge and not a judge that just agrees with a political party in power? Something to think about. I don't have an answer for you. Competing political parties is the last part. Okay? Have to have more than one political party in a democracy in order for democracy to exist. You got to have choice for the people. If you only have one political party, that's an oligarchy, which is a form of authoritarianism. You have to have more than one political party. No matter how much you might not like that other political party, there must always be more than one. So at least two. Okay? All right. So that's all that I've got for you today. Um, just keep on doing what you're doing. Make good choices. Stay safe out there. See you later.